Hi there everyone, welcome back to Dandelion Delphi Tutorials. This is for our grade 12s looking at an OOP question in the Supplementary of 2019. This would be your question 3 of your final exam at the end of this year. Please remember that you may leave comments and I will answer them as soon as I can. So first what we need to do is always to look at what was given. And as you can see, there were attributes given as well as a constructor method and an incomplete toString. So this is one where we are going to add to the toString. And there were also two accessor methods given. Now, important is that you keep that in mind when you go to question 3.2 so that you use these methods that are given. So if we have a look at the attributes that were given, we have an ID, and it's a unique number. We would expect it to be an integer number, but we have to check because it could be string. Name obviously would be string. Hours could be an integer number, but if you have a look at the given code, you will see that it's actually real. So it is important to go and see what has been given and what the data types are. And the sales amount, as expected, was a real value. Now we'll start with question 3.1.1. Press pause and try it yourself. In here we have to write two methods. The first method is telling us that we're receiving a value as a parameter. So we know we have a parameter. And nowhere does it say that we are returning a result. So therefore it would be a procedure. If you look at the wording of question 3.1.1b, it looks the same. So we're receiving a parameter and we're updating the attribute sales. These two are both mutator methods because we're making change to the attributes of the class. Now, if we have a look at update sales, my procedure, I have indicated that the p hour parameter is real so that I match it with the attributes that was declared there as real. And that's the same for update sales. I do recommend that you just do one method at a time. Press Ctrl-Shift-C and then code that method. So for this procedure, we're receiving the number of hours and we had to add it to the existing number of hours. So we're making a change there to our attribute if hours by taking the existing amount and adding my parameter. The same goes for your sales, the update sales procedure, also receiving a value and updating my if sales attribute with the amount that I'm receiving from the parameter. So now try to create the method and complete it for qualifies for bonus. For 3.1.2, press pause and try it yourself. So we can immediately see that this method is a function because we're returning a value and the data type of this function is Boolean. So it's either going to return a true or a false. Make sure that when you have a function that returns a Boolean value, that both true and false will receive a value. Now the trainee will qualify for a bonus if they meet both of these conditions. There is no mention here of receiving a value, so it won't have any parameters. So you would use the if hours and if sales as the attributes of your class to calculate whether they are qualifying for a bonus or not. So here is my function qualifies for bonus, returning a Boolean value. And then I make sure that my function will return a result of either true or false. So I'm starting with false, and if they meet both conditions, I then change my result to true. Remember, your result will match the data type of your function. So this should be either true or false because my result data type is Boolean. And the hours had to be 15 or more, and the sales had to be 1,200 or more. Make sure that you include these two values with the equal sign. The wording in the paper says that it must be at least 15. At least means that 15 is included. Same goes for the sales. At least 1,200 means it is included. The final question for 3.1 is to complete this toString that was provided to display the output as explained in here. Where they have these little brackets, around values, that means it is your attributes of your class. But note that you do have to include round brackets there, and inside the round brackets you'll give them the ID, which is also an attribute, and then the wording in between as well. So for the result of the toString, they just gave us the front part here, and we now have to go and add the brackets, the field trainee ID, which is an integer, so remember to add your into string, attended, the hours, and take note of the number of decimal places that you have to show. We had to display 2 decimal places, and then the labeling there, and then again the F sales, which we would want to display as a rand value, so you have to add FF currency, 2 decimal places, and a full stop at the end. You should save your program often while you are coding to prevent data loss if the power should go off. But this is a good time to save and run your program. You won't get any output, but at least you can sort out any syntax errors. It's time to move to your main form, where you will be instantiating the object. Remember, that means that you are calling the method create from your class. You also need to set the button to be visible for button 3.2.2. Press pause and try it yourself. For this question, the input for the person's name and their trainer ID has been provided. You now need to instantiate the object. Before, I showed you how to copy the object that was declared for you and then paste it down here. Change that colon to be changed to an assignment statement by adding the equal sign, and then add .create. At this point, your program should show you some hints on what arguments your constructor create needs. I've copied the signature of the constructor create for you here, because remember, we need to match the parameters where it was declared with the arguments that we send it in Nod. The number, there were 2 parameters, so we need 2 arguments. The order, first the trainee ID, then the name. So therefore, I'm sending it the local variable iTrainee ID, and then the name name that was stored. And finally, the data type. The first parameter needs to be an integer, and the second parameter needs to be a string. So therefore, the first argument here is my local variable iTrainee ID, which is an integer variable, and then the string variable name. Make sure that you study this line of code, because without it, you would have to code blindly. That means that you would have to code without seeing any output. You can't test your program if this single line of code does not work. And then they also asked us to make the next button visible, so we had to set the visible property to true. Before we continue, you need to be aware of the text file that has been provided. The format of the text file has been given, and here is an example of the first 4 entries in the text file as well. The first number here is the trainee ID, and then with a T or an S, it determines whether it is an entry for training or for sales. If it's for training, this means hours, and if it's for sales, this is the money value that needs to be added. Let's move on to the next button, and we'll break it up into 2 parts. So read this, press pause, and try it yourself before we continue to do the next bit. We were asked to test if the file exists, and you are able to use file exist, or you can use try except. And using the name of the text file, just remember your .txt there. And if the file does not exist, then important your begin and end, display a message, and I've used exit. You're allowed to use exit in an if statement. You're not allowed to use exit inside of a loop. To read from the text file, we need our assign file and our reset file, as you have done since grade 11. And we also needed to declare a Boolean variable that we set to false before the loop. It is changed to true once I find the trainee ID, since I have to display a message outside of this loop if this trainee ID was not found. Then I have my read line, and as I have explained before, just copy out a couple of lines from your text file in here so that you can see what you need to find, copy, and delete. We were asked to search for the person who we used in the constructor create in the previous button. We were asked to find all their entries. So the trainee ID is the little bit at the front before the semicolon. I'm here just finding the position of the semicolon and then copying out that line from 1 for IPOS -1 characters so that I don't copy out the semicolon as well. I have changed it to an integer because here I can now use that access a method called getTraineeID to test if it is equal to the value in the text file. Remember, getTraineeID, the accessor method, is a function and therefore needs to be part of another structure. And in this case, it is part of the if statement, part of the condition. In this question, try and use all the functions and procedures inside of the class as far as you can. In this instance now, once I find the code, I set be found to true. But you will see that I've not made my while loop stop once I find the first entry because a single code can appear many times. So one trainee ID can appear many times inside of the text file. So I don't want my loop to stop once I found it. Then I need to get hold of whether it is a T or an S. And there's many methods that you can use to get hold of the T or the S. What I've done is I found the position of the hash in the string. And then I'm going to test if the character in the position where I found the hash -1 is a T. If it is a T, it means it is a trainee entry. And now I need to get hold of the last bit after the T. To get hold of that last bit in S line, I need to get rid of the first bit. So therefore I first have a delete where I delete from position 1 for IPOS number of characters. And IPOS currently holds the position of the hash, so I will delete that as well. I'll then be left with that last bit there. Since I'm busy with a T for trainee, I need to call the procedure update hours. And remember, a procedure stands on its own. So it's not part of another structure like we've used the getTraineeID function here. It just stands on its own. I need to send it a real data type. So all I'm doing here is I'm changing this line from a string to a real number. Then if it is not a T, it must then be an S. And I also delete the front bit to get hold of the value after the hash. And I call update sales in this instance, doing the same with the argument here, changing the string from a string to a real number. It's important here to keep track of your ends because we have quite a few. This first one here would be for the blue if, and the second one here is for your green if to find the trainee ID, and then the end for the while. Important is that your close file is always outside of your while loop or you will get an input-output error. Now you can try the next part of this button, press pause, and I'll show you the memo soon. We were asked to clear the output error. That just means that you have to clear your rich edit with .lines.clear. And then also we had to display a message if we did not find the trainee ID. So if be found is still false, I have to display a message in the rich edit, and then I have to make the button invisible. In other words, set the visible property to false. Then I have my else, so that means I have found this person. And I will then display my toString. Your toString is a function and therefore part of another structure. Your toString will be called, as with the other methods, with the object name dot and then the toString. But the toString is often called in objects that give us output, like for example the rich edit in this case, but show messages or labels, and also we can use them just to assign them to a string or maybe even an array declared as a string. And then I had to also make this button visible. To test your program properly, you need to always use all the examples of input and output and test them all. So you need to test that you find Cody sure and that your output looks the same as this. It is important to instantiate your object first. This program helped you by making these other buttons invisible, so you couldn't see them unless you have clicked on this button here. But they could all be available, and you have to remember that your constructor create needs to run first before you can use any of the other methods, functions, and procedures in the class. If your program was still running and you wanted to change the trainee to Lindiwe Dlamini, you would have to also click on the Click to Continue button 3.2.1 first before you can click on button 3.2.2. This is needed so that we can change now the trainee name as well as the ID that needs to be processed here in button 3.2.2. So make sure that when you change the trainee, that you always click on your constructor button first before you click on any other button. Once you've tested the previous question, move on to button 3.2.3 and see if you can do the following. Take note that this top part here is just your toString, which you displayed in the previous button. So you only need to add the line below. Important that you use your method qualifiers for bonus at the top. Qualifiers for bonus is a function and therefore again part of another statement, again part of an if statement in the condition. We use the object name dot the name of the function and we test if that was true. This function here did not need any arguments because it didn't have any parameters. And if this function returns a true, then we display the trainee qualifies for a bonus, else we display that they do not qualify for the bonus. Testing and running your program is very important. Again, you can test with Cody, but remember when we change over to a new trainee, then you need to click on that first button again to instantiate the object. In this case, you would also have to click on the second button to be able to qualify, to test if they qualify for the bonus or not. And that was it for question 3 of the Supplementary of 2019. I have explained OOP in Dandelion Delphi Book 3. That's my resident Hadida. Please remember that you may leave some comments and I will get to your questions as soon as I can. Hope to see you soon.